the only talk radio show that takes you along with host and age explorer Raad on his continuing journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older. The Raad Life is brought to you this week by Your Home for a Lifetime, a company dedicated to empowering you to stay safely, independently, and comfortably in your own home. And now here is your host, Raad.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's another Wednesday. It's a little after 12 o'clock because we got too busy talking in studio and off the air, forgot to turn it on. But the mics are on. We're hot and coming at you from OC Talk Radio station at the corner of Bristol and what's the other street? Sunflower.
Don't tell them where they're at. The people will show up.
Oh, no. I know you have a...
You're like the Wizard of Oz. We don't know anybody where we're at.
Oh, you're the wizard? Wow. Okay. You've had a good week, I take it, Paul, right?
I did.
But this is I can't believe it. It's our 5th year of doing this almost on a weekly basis. Yes, what? I mean, I've had relationships shorter than the one I've had with you, honestly.
Yeah,
right? But one of the things that's really exciting about doing the show for 5 years is we've had the ability to see how this medium and the content that we put out has been useful, both for the people that we've had the honor of having as guests on the show, and then also the topics we have addressed. For those who do not know, we really went into it, or at least I went into it, having no clue what I was doing. And I was fortunate to, my life is happenstance, and I'm a firm believer in happy accidents. And
that's the Raad Life.
Right, that's the Raad Life. Maybe we should just change the slogan to that. Happy accident, Raad Life, the happy accidents. And so my first guest was Casey Kasem's daughter, Carrie. And we were talking about elder abuse. We were talking about setting up nonprofits. And we were talking about, her dad. And, I didn't get Mr. Radio to be on the show, but I got his daughter. So, that was a good start. And she pretty much, and I credit Carrie with this. Carrie, if you're listening, I know you've got another expo coming for Kasem Care in March, I believe. But thank you again for setting us on this path of very organic, very conversational, kind of vulnerable discussion, right? And so we have tried to maintain that most of the time for the last 5 years. And because we've had the ability to have that perspective over 5 years, when I had a chance to sit, to have my guest today, Lynn Selich, who's on with us. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been at this a lot longer. And in one form or the other, PR, and
Sure.
you and I were talking about how that whole realm has just changed dramatically.
Dramatically, yes.
Right?
Yes.
It almost changes almost like on a daily basis, to be honest.
It really does.
Now
It really, really does.
Right, we're talking about augmented reality now. We're talking about, AI and how that fits into your marketing. And, it was bad enough I didn't understand why I needed a website. Now somebody's telling me I need AI and augmented reality, and it's like, what is this all about, right?
Well, I'm still teaching my clients about search engine optimization, and it almost feels like that was back in the dark ages, because you're right, things are advancing at such a rapid pace.
So fast.
And it's really difficult these days when we all know what it's like to just look at our phone or look at our
When do we not look at our phone, right?
Right, our social media, but I noticed this a couple of years ago where I was listening to the Brandenburg Concerto.
Okay.
Just on my walk in the morning.
Yeah.
And then I noticed on my Facebook page, like a BMW ad popped up, and what was playing in the background?
The same
the
kind of...
Brandenburg Concerto.
Exactly.
Wow. There you go.
And it freaked me out a little bit, and I thought, no.
Algorithms.
No. But yes. And it's customization.
Yeah.
So they know. So I'm guessing, like, if you're somebody who's really into rap, or you're somebody who's really into jazz, that if that same pops up on your phone, you're going to be hearing, somebody else's music, and that's where it's going.
Well, it's so true. I mean, I do commercial interior design. We do interior design. That's my bread and butter. I know it sounds like I do this show for a living, but I don't. But
but you are good.
But thank you. That's very sweet coming from you. I appreciate it. But so we do a lot of search. I mean, people go, well, don't you go into showrooms and stuff? No, people that are busy find shortcuts to do what they need to do, right? So,
Yes.
you know, like spending 3 hours picking fabrics and going to showrooms, no, that's not what interior designers do. So we do a lot of research online, right? And in a lot of cases, it's not just being lazy or not wanting to basically, you know, run around town all and spend gas, but it's because some of the items that are actually most up to date in terms of data, in terms of catalogs and stuff like that, first place it goes is digital before it gets printed.
Yes.
Right? If you're even still printing, right?
Right.
So we're doing a lot of search, and so it's fascinating to me when I'm like at 8 o'clock at night, I'm looking for like that armchair for a client, right? And then the next morning I jump onto social media, whether it's Google or Facebook. It used to be only.
And there it pops
right? Well, here comes you know, like the
That
same
same
chair,
chair.
and then 3 other ones, and the side table that goes with it,
You're like,
and maybe
it's a push,
Yes, and
right?
a
It's a
pillow.
push.
So it's scary when you encounter it, but then I don't know if you remember probably about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, you know, 20 years ago there was no Facebook, right? So when you say 7 or 8 years ago, that's about like half the life cycle of this company.
You
Is that
bet.
right?
Yeah.
I remember where they were basically doing facial recognition software, and they were trying to get it into retail, where you would walk into a store and based on your
Demographic.
face, no, it would recognize your face, Lynn, because you know you're
Oh, I
posting
see. Yeah,
profile
yes,
pictures all day
yes.
long, right?
Mhm.
If
Yep.
anybody goes onto
Yep.
Facebook right now and you post a photo, and you go to tag, and you go, well, how come? Wait a minute, 5 of these people are already tagged, right? Because there's facial recognition software.
Yeah.
So they were going to
Crazy.
apply that in a retail environment. So when you walked into a retail store, the system would recognize who you are, and based on your search history, it would inform the person who's the salesperson in the shop what to pitch you and how to pitch it to you.
Oh my God.
Right.
Yeah.
And then applies to hotels. It applies to all kinds of stuff. So yes, the conversation about privacy and non-privacy, days in the past where you would basically have to opt in. You remember that?
Yeah, oh,
You would
yes.
opt in, right?
Well, and it's the creation of, it improves service, but at the same time, it is
Customer
that-
service, right? One-on-one personalized service.
And like you said, but then it kind of crosses the barrier of privacy. And at one point, I was so frustrated with the way this was heading. I was like, I'm going off the grid, taking down all my
Did you
social.
find a place to go off the grid?
No, no, and it's a weird psychology that we didn't grow up with it. But can you imagine? Now they're having these conversations about people's posture. You know,
Oh yeah,
It's changing
your
your
eyesight,
physically-
your blue light. Blue light. Who the heck talked about blue light, right?
and the psychology behind being addicted to this little thing. And I guess we can all say, to some extent, that we're guilty of that. And it's really disturbing when you walk into, let's say, a restaurant or any place, and everybody's looking at their phones and nobody's communicating. And I think for those of us who are in communications, that's concerning.
So one of the things, and I've said this on the air before, and I shared it with Paul, one of the things that was a happy accident out of this show is it actually, I go on a trip, on a vacation, I shut it out for an hour a week.
Oh, that's smart.
Because you cannot really, especially when the camera's turned on, and you know the cameras weren't always turned on at OC Talk Radio, but in about 6 months from being on the air, all of a sudden, because we used to joke, I have a tailor that was a friend of mine, and he'd say, oh, you know, this is brought to you by Dave Welsh at Bespoke, you know, who dresses me for radio, right? And then 6 months later, it's like, whoops, okay, glad
we need a visual.
Glad I have a visual, but
or it's the old joke, I have a face for radio.
you have a face for
right?
radio, yeah. So, you know, it's fascinating that you're right. We don't do this. Like, we don't even sit down and talk with one another unless there's an agenda or a to-do list or some sort of bullet points that we need to address, right?
Yeah.
The art of conversation, the fact that talking even about difficult topics, the actual exercise of going through that and what that in itself, whether you agree or disagree at the end of the conversation, you walk away with some sort of reward for having had the exchange.
Sure.
And we used to do it all the time.
Well, you see that in politics and the polarization of
Oh, yeah,
the
absolutely.
inability to just have a conversation
Right.
like maybe our folks did.
Right.
You know, and
We can agree to disagree, but actually having a civil conversation about it allows for growth on both sides, whether admittedly or not. You walk away with some other perspective after having that exchange. So I get to do that once a week with somebody like you, and we get to talk about stuff that's really beyond just here's my bullet points and I need to cross these things off my list.
Well, maybe that's why we're seeing this surge in popularity of podcasts and of TED Talks and of these mediums that allow people to express their ideas in a safe, if you will, environment. And we experience that on Stu News Sunday with Tom and Lynn on KOCI, where we have people come in and sit down with us, and they're not always, I'm not always politically aligned with them, but we have a great conversation, and we inform people about someone's view or platform, or if they're running for office, and where can people go to hear somebody like that one-on-one or via a podcast or via this type of platform, so that they can inform themselves. I used to pick up the newspaper, or I notice a lot of my neighbors now are getting the Wall Street Journal. I mean, I get the Epoch Times, but or even if you get the LA Times or the Register, it's like they're getting smaller and smaller.
Well, the print material is getting smaller and smaller, but I would argue that even before it got smaller and smaller, the quality of the content of the print material started to skew because it was driven by marketing. If a particular paper had the stranglehold on, let's say, a conservative platform bent, right? The other one couldn't really compete in that market, had to find another spot and another focus in order to draw that advertising money to them, right? And so you're right. I mean, we have. I'm non-party preference registered voter, right? I've been for over a decade, right? I voted both sides. The only party I was ever registered to was the Republican Party, right? So because the minute I say non-party preference, it's like, oh, well, you're not conservative. I was like, no, that's the only party I was ever registered to, right? Yeah. But I opened the platform and the show by saying to people, if you're interested, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, and really honestly, it should be person and topic, person of and subject matter, right? Versus just affiliation and loyalty to a blue or a red jersey.
Yes.
Because I think most people are that way. Most people, I think, are fiscally, conservative, socially liberal. I mean, how do you not be in one degree or the other if you live in the state of California? It's kind of...
Well, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we say, look, come on by because it's not a leaning platform. And we're going to basically talk about the topic and we're going to poke holes in it and we're going to grill based on the positives and the negatives.
Yeah, you're like the DMZ of...
It's a DMZ zone. I like that.
The podcast radio.
Can I use that? I like
absolutely.
The DMZ.
Well, there's a reason why the DMZ existed, right? Because you need that. You need to have that kind of neutral... I mean, think of any... think of any
it's a neutral zone.
Example of a neutral zone, and I think a lot of us need and want that because we're on some level we're forced to be instant decision makers, and by having conversations with people, you get the opportunity to maybe consider the other side or consider another opinion or another way of looking at things. I constantly am challenging myself to look at something. I have my own. We all have our biases. Partly by the way we grew up, the way we were educated.
The bubble that we're exposed to.
Exactly, right. And so that I'm constantly forcing myself to say, whoa, Lynn, don't make it, try not to be so, judgmental or put somebody in a box or put this idea
which is human.
On
I mean,
shelf.
that's a human trait. You filter through your own,
And so to a certain extent, we do need a little bit of a neutral zone. Like, hey, can I step into the neutral zone and just like, put together my thoughts because I'm getting bombarded with so many different ideas and so many different things every single day.
Right.
Pick up your phone and you're being bombarded with how many messages? Like I don't even know if anybody knows how much it used to be.
I think I read somewhere that we get hit by something like 3,200 ads a day.
Yeah, and it used to be like 200.
Yeah.
Back in the days of billboards. Think about it, billboards. You hardly see billboards anymore.
Well, billboards don't stay put anymore. Now they're digital screens that change on you while you're still talking.
Yeah, because it maximizes their investment in that piece of property, I guess. But
so to your point about that, though, Lynn, I mean, we're talking about this just in generality, right? I mean, it's kind of the nature of how we live our lives, right? And then if we just kind of focus it for a minute about content development, right? Just to kind of have a reference, sort of an anchoring. That same problem occurs in that sphere as well, because you are literally inundated with so much information, and by virtue of labeled information, somehow the assumption is it's valuable or actually accurate or whatever, and it isn't necessarily. So you got to almost develop the muscle to start filtering this stuff. But again, You are inundated with it, so much of it, consistently. Where do you find the time to reflect?
Right, and that quite well, and it's an interesting dilemma, I guess, if you will, because I have worked in public relations and public affairs for almost 30 years. I hate to say it, but since this is somewhat of a show about how things have changed,
yeah.
and aging, and baby boomers in particular, because we were kind of straddling the old world and the new world, right?
We have a poster child right over there.
Yes, and all right, Paul knows what we're talking about. And it is when I started my career in public relations, when we would send out a press release, the Associated Press would call us and fact check, and not just once, sometimes numerous times, depending on what the content was, right? And in today's world, I'll write a press release. I will send it out, let's say on the wire, and it will get printed verbatim. I don't get a fact-checking call. I could say that the sky is falling and the moon is pink, and it'll get printed. And to me is a little bit scary, because how much of what...
Well, it could be abused.
Well, it is being abused.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on a variety of levels.
Manipulated, you name it.
Well, which is why, maybe the term fake news has like, even the Democratic Party is using the word now, because it's happening, right? It's happening on both sides of the scale. And how does one protect themselves from that? Or how does one educate oneself on a subject matter when you have questionable content potentially out there? What source do you go to, like an AP? I mean, even the AP these days, some people say, well, even the AP has been infiltrated, and they're not even really very neutral to some degree. And wow, that just kind of hits at the core of
right. Where do I go? Where is the non-biased?
Like the Constitution, even our constitutional rights to it. And that limits our freedom, right? Because our freedom can be manipulated in a way. And as I was saying, I thought about, I'm free to go off the grid. But when you really, really think about it, and I've really given this a lot of thought, when you really think about it, can you really, in today's world, go off the grid? I know that there are people that are not on the grid. They didn't get on the grid to begin with. But if you're in the kind of businesses that you and I are in, there's really not there's a choice, but there's not a choice. You have to have a presence.
Right. Well, I
and how do you how do you mitigate?
Well, I think it's a personal struggle and sort of decision that you make, and I think it varies depending on time and space and wherever you're at when you're dealing with on a personal level or maybe on a professional level. What do you prioritize? Because I just had, and it's kind of funny you should mention this, I had a very kind of moment of truth with myself a couple of days ago. I had been on a trip to St. Louis. It was pretty much 8 hours with a client. I mean, really didn't have time, right?
Pretty intense.
Pretty intense. I tell people we're not just interior designers, we're also like therapists and counselors and shopping partners and all the other stuff, right? Bet. We just hang the shingles underneath the shingles. So it was pretty intense. And I'm pretty. I think I'm a little bit of a political addict. Like I really want to. I will really want to know, right? And I question every side, and I really read the stuff before I share it. Please, people, do not share stuff before you read it.
Right.
Okay? Then don't just hit the share button. Just read it. Okay.
Read past the headline, because a lot of times the body of what you're looking at has
nothing to do with the headline.
Right.
The headline is the trailer to catch your interest.
Well, that's what interrupters do. Yeah. Right. So anyway.
Well, but my current pet peeve. Okay, my current pet peeve, as in this week. It'll change next week, right? But this week's pet peeve is people who share content, right, that they don't even read it to know that the date on the content is from 2 or 3 years earlier, right? And they're putting it out to
as
make
if
a point. I'm like, because the headline basically could happen yesterday. And with the people that we're dealing with in the political sphere, their behavior could have been 2 years ago or yesterday. It doesn't matter, right?
Sure.
So that's been my pet peeve. So now it's like whenever I see something like this and I go, you just made me read this, okay? And it's from 3 years ago, okay? Please do not post that, So, but
and then you're the bad guy for being
oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I was critical.
Right.
No, it's still relevant. I don't know. I agree to disagree, and I'm like, I'm not going down that rabbit hole with you, right? But the thing about it, to your point, is you want to be engaged, you want to be informed, you want to allow yourself to absorb from different sides, because that's the only way really that you can formulate your own personal opinion on something. You can't just get it from one channel, one pipeline.
Right.
Okay? It's biased one way or the other. It's leaning, it's personally filtered, whatever, right? So I got to the point where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to wait until the primaries. I'm not even really going to pay attention. This is just all noise right now. It's just all cacophony. And I'm just going to leave it alone, right? But then I had a certain guilt feeling that I was basically...
You're not doing your due diligence.
I was abandoning my responsibility as to be an informed voter. Now, I grew up in a part of the world where it wasn't dictatorial, but we didn't really have the right to vote.
Yeah.
Right? And so when I came over here, the right to vote was this great thing that basically somebody just handed me. And I've lived in the United States longer than I've lived anywhere else, right? And I've lived in a number of places. And so don't get me started on, sort of the sadness that I see of some of the stuff that's happening, including people not talking to one another, right? But and that will have a cost that we will be paying for a number of years. But the fact that you would willingly abandon your responsibility to be an informed voter, to be an informed citizen in your community, I just couldn't get myself to turn it off. So to your point, I can go off the grid, but then there's a part of me that's going to ache because I'm not really living up to my responsibility of being an engaged citizen.
Yeah, no.
Right?
Well, and because we're both involved in our communities, and I've got a lot of skin in the game.
Overly involved.
Yeah, that's and that's okay, because I tell people when it comes to politics, because everything is so polarizing, and so I had a conversation the other day with a friend, and she said, well, the reason that California is going the way it is because of Trump. Okay, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole like you said, but
well, it's a very simplistic, easy kind of like soundbite
way to do it.
Yeah.
But the reality, or my reality, or the reality of people who are really involved in their community, is that if you want to make a difference politically, you can do it right in your own backyard, just by meeting whoever your representatives are.
Right.
And that, I think we've gotten a little bit away from, they serve at our leisure, right? It's supposed to be government.
They're employed by us.
The people, right?
Yeah,
and
they're employed by us.
They're not like, people want to be told what to do. That's to some extent. There's a psychology behind if you have an advertising background, people sometimes, or maybe for the most part, don't want to have to decide. They want to be spoon-fed. That's how
Well, I don't want the responsibility of making that decision. If somebody tells me, then it's easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I always tell people, if you move into an area, or even if you've lived in a community for a long, long time, get to know your city council person. They're just exactly like you. But what they did is they chose to take that extra step of serving at a level where they're making decisions, very serious decisions, about the quality of our day-to-day life. And when I talk about day-to-day, I mean look at everybody has their own little schedule or their routine that they do every day. And I could walk you through my day and give you a summary of how policymaking affects that experience or not. And I mean, as an example, we are now faced with the state of California is imposing a mandatory affordable housing, and there's certain quotas that each city needs to meet. And in Newport Beach, I believe it's 4,700 or 4,800 units. Where are those units going to be built? We're already impacted with a lot of traffic. We've already got a lot of building going on as it is. The coastal development is largely controlled by the California Coastal Commission, and so they have their agenda, which is not always bad, but it is what it is. And
you've got the visitor serving requirement, you've got all kinds of things that you have to jump through for coastal. Yeah.
And so as I said, I always tell people, do you know your city council person? Because if you have a problem with an issue
Right.
that affects you on a day-to-day basis, they're your direct link to the higher ups.
Right.
But so many people either are intimidated, lazy, just think they don't have enough information to go to somebody that's an elected official and have that conversation. But that's literally what they're there for.
Yeah,
that's literally what they're there for.
Lynn, it's true, and I completely agree with you. And I think, we also have to remember to look at things like, let's say, the affordable housing. Look at like the homeless issue, which is huge in Orange County right now, and not look at things in a snapshot. Because these are problems that we find ourselves in today because of decisions that were made
20 years
that were
ago,
not
20 or 30 years
necessarily
ago.
positive.
Right.
I mean, when you basically, and I'll use an example of San Clemente. Like, if you said affordable housing project in San Clemente, you might as well say tenement housing, right? But again, the word affordable is relevant.
But if you say that, then you're a bigot or you're a whatever.
Well, but
but it's true
But here's the thing.
to some extent.
Affordable housing in San Clemente, don't use the word affordable. There's a problem with housing in that you have people that are starting their lives. Okay, these are born and raised in the community. To your point about being invested in your community, right? These are born and raised in the communities. They have a cultural connection and a direct line to the history of the community, to the historical nature, the fabric, the quality of life, all the things that symbolize that particular community versus another, right? These are people that are ingrained in this.
Yeah.
Now they're starting their lives. Okay? And they cannot afford to go into the real estate pricing that we have to deal with. So they either live with their parent, if they
Right.
happen to be, or they have to move. So we are losing people that are future payroll tax base. You have aging communities that are not spending so much in retail sales because older people do not
Right.
buy as much. So
And-
your retail
right.
sale tax base is now depleting. You have more demands on the communities because you have an aging population. You have requirements that you as a municipality need to provide. Where are you going to get that funded from? You are built out communities, so therefore your real estate development fees are not going to be like they were 20 years ago.
Correct.
And you're still burying your head in the sand and not talking about things like youth incubators or some sort of assistance or some sort of empowerment program to keep these people in the community.
Sure.
Because they have a linkage to the community. So I'm just saying, whether you do that or not, what happens is now these communities, you're losing that base.
Right.
You got people that are coming in that are maybe from inland, want to go to coastal communities. They're able to and afford to basically move to those communities. Those people, well-intentioned as they are, do not have the linkage and the legacy connection to the community.
Sure.
And yet
And
these
it
are
changes the fabric
it changes
of the
fabric of
community.
because these are the
Right.
people that now also have the time to run for office. Right? So what I mean by not looking at things in a snapshot, because when you look at them in a snapshot, we all basically start polarizing and digging our heels.
Sure.
You look at it across the board, and you look at where we're at and when you avoided building affordable housing as part of the legal requirement, and you did in lieu fees, and you put the burden now on the cities, and now the cities couldn't do it because the community base went up in arms the minute the city said affordable housing. There's a ripple effect to how we find ourselves in today.
Well, California has so many issues, and the unfunded pension liability doesn't help either. It's a very
Right.
complicated issue, of which is also, but it's also impacting our quality of life. So,
Sure.
in other words, if San Clemente has
And I'm just using
all
San Clemente
cities-
as an example,
Yeah.
but I mean, you could pick your choose
Newport, it could be anybody.
Right.
Most cities do not have the resources the coastal communities do, but in terms of a sustainability issue,
Which is really what it is.
am looking at exactly what you're saying and what's it going to look like here 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, when what is beginning to occur, and I have numerous friends who have moved out of state, who some have money, some don't, whatever, but they're all leaving for the same reason, because they were getting taxed to death, and they are approaching a time when they're going to be on a fixed income. They're the baby boomers.
Right.
They're like you and me, and
Sure, and
and
they
their
didn't put
kids-
enough money aside to actually. They didn't think they were going to live this long.
Maybe, or I have wealthy friends who've moved to lovely areas outside of California, and like one friend was saying, since I moved a couple of years ago, I've saved $300,000 in taxes.
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's, even saving $30,000 a year. Because when you look at finite resources, what else could you have done with that money other than fund the unfunded pension liabilities or whatever issues in California we're struggling with?
That's 3 years worth of full boat assisted living.
Right, in your own home.
Yeah, full boat. Mm-hmm. Right,
and we're living longer, which is another issue that's going to impact. I'm looking at it. My brother passed away, so I'm an only child of two aging parents, and I'm looking at this, and thank God we have had to have some conversations where I say, you guys, I'm concerned about this. We saw my grandparents go through it, and it's not an easy conversation to have, but we have to have it, especially given kind of this outside pressure that is now going to start affecting our lives. And again, I'm, in terms of my own life, the jury's out. In 5 years, I may be forced to leave. It may not be a choice when you crunch the numbers, like you're saying. When you start crunching the numbers and looking at, whatever your particular situation is.
And that's if you're fortunate enough to even have the ability to crunch numbers.
Right.
I mean, we talk about the homeless situation, and we talk about, it's like it's all these, drug addicts, youth, whatever, and people don't realize that two of the largest, fastest growing groups in the homeless issue is seniors and families.
Well, I believe, and this is something that
medical cost, impact,
right.
just.
Yeah,
it
all starts to pile up.
Yeah.
I do really feel, though, that some of these, especially when you talk about algorithms, if you were to chart some of these societal ills that we're dealing with right now, my personal opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, is that it is the unintended consequences of bad policy making, i.e.
almost always.
Prop 47, 57, 109. My brother was murdered. The guy that murdered him is in jail, and he unfortunately fell outside of the 3 strikes. If that and Marcy's Law had been in place, we wouldn't be going to the parole hearings every 3 years
to
now.
make sure he stays in.
Because this is not somebody we want
Right.
out. But that being said, if Prop 47 is allowing people, there is basically giving people license to commit crime.
Yeah.
And our police, I know our police chief in Newport, Chief Lewis. He is an amazing, amazing man, and we have had lengthy conversations about this topic because it affects our family on a personal level. In that we are allowing this bad behavior. And it's only a matter of time when somebody snaps or somebody is so high they don't know what they're doing or whatever, and they murder somebody like my brother. And we're starting to see those cases now emerge. This Kate Steinle, there's you name it. They're you're just going about your business and you come across somebody.
And no community is really
who should be in jail.
Yeah, no community is. Every community is vulnerable. Yeah.
We're seeing crime in Newport that we never saw, and I'm sure at San Clemente. When I think of San Clemente, I think of little quaint beach town. Just lovely to walk around.
Nobody's spared. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's bad policies. So again, kind of bringing it back. So where do you? Because again, the other thing is most people are so stretched.
I'm stretched.
There's not a lot of time. There's not a lot of free time where you can leisurely indulge and educate yourself. So it becomes even more and more important to self-regulate the kind of content development and what you put out there, because you can easily, like we just talked about, you could easily sway it one way or the other. You could easily bias it one way or the other versus just putting it out there from a trust position. It used to be the newspapers. It's no longer that. Those things are going under one, quicker than anything. Podcasts, not everything is created equal, right? Yeah. So again, I think, and there's no regulating. Like that is not a regulated format, right? The podcasts don't have any regulation.
That's right. You can just
get
basically
out there
do whatever you want to do.
Right?
Yes, it is a quandary. But when we talk about freedom and allowing the freedom of choice, just what we've discussed just now,
Right.
is I think what we're struggling with is that there is a plethora of information and we're free to choose what we want to believe and all of that. And that's a great freedom indeed. However, it's also easy for people with resources to use our platform to manipulate the masses.
Right.
And to me, that's a little bit scary. But we work in the business, so
Right.
I'm looking at it from 30,000.
And we craft messaging. I mean,
Right.
we're doing it. So the only, I find that the only safeguard is that your moral compass. Like, you obviously you got a client, you're trying to develop a message that's going to be beneficial, but how you go about it, and it's like God or the devil is in the details. How you go about it, what's the guiding light? It's your own personal compass, right? I mean, that's what it really comes down to.
Right. Well, there's that. So I think that, so when I think about my compass,
Yeah.
it was developed as a child through my parents, through my grandparents, through our community, through our church,
Your value system.
Right.
Yeah.
But that had to be developed. My parents had boundaries. The
Yeah.
church gave me a compass.
It wasn't just rights; it was rights and responsibilities.
Right. And I think that the sense of personal responsibility is being cast aside, and just let the
Personal
government
accountability is out the window, yeah.
let's let the government take care of certain aspects of our lives. But that is an oxymoron, because we are supposed to be the government.
Right.
And that's what I struggle with is, but if I'm somebody who, like, my grandfather was an immigrant from actually both sides of my family, from Barcelona, and he would literally bang on the dinner table. You don't know what it means to have the opportunity to be in this country and to reach your highest potential. And he didn't have a great education. I mean, he had a high school education, and when he came here with his brother, their parents were, we are going to rise because of our hard work. Nobody's going to give it to us. Don't expect anything. Get out there and take what you've got. And they ended up being very successful businessmen, but it was because they had that hunger, I think.
And that's one
you
thing.
can't take away the hunger.
No, and I can totally relate to that. And in a lot of places, including Western Europe, there are places where the circles are just too closed off. You as a newcomer into that, like even in the UK, like you have to either be like almost born into a circle, or there's still a caste system of some sort, right?
Oh, what would have happened if I moved to another country?
Yeah. So
I
think it depends where, because it's interesting. I have found that communities that are very small and are sort of need to coexist and collaborate tend to have a very healthy approach. I remember being on the island of Mauritius for a project, and they read their news in French. They conducted business in English. There was a Sikh temple next to a Muslim mosque, next to a church that was a tropical, like red roof church, and everybody basically coexisted. And they had their primary business was hospitality. So they actually would.
They had to make it
We're
work.
all on a friggin' island, and we all have to exist.
This is the only way we're gonna.
And the British took a turn at us. The French took a turn at us. We got a little sort of mixed background here, mixed bag. And so it's interesting, because you're right. I think we have this freedom. We sometimes, I think, forget that the sort of the uniqueness of the American experience, and we want the rights, but we don't want to take on the accountability or the responsibility.
I think because Western society has pervaded pretty much throughout the world, and especially
it's been exported.
because of
Absolutely.
Is that everybody?
Hey, I watched Happy Days in Kuwait on an antenna that I would point towards Dubai, because they, when I was in high school. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so, but what people don't realize when then you travel to other countries, you realize that even though it feels very westernized, or that country has its own laws, its own dynamic that is not.
Yep.
They don't let you don't have ultimate freedom
I
everywhere.
wish more people actually traveled. I almost wish that it was a requirement when you were in high school.
Or serve in the military.
Or serve in the military. I mean, because...
Kind of do what Israel does, you either go to school
Or you serve.
Well, I think you have to. You
Actually,
have
you have
to
to
spend
serve. You have to
2
spend-
years,
yeah.
right? But then you can't just like, I'm just going to live at my parents'
Right.
house and whatever.
Right.
Post stuff online. You have to have some like I had to have a job. I had to have. It's either if you're not in school, you're working, or you're doing chores, or you're doing something productive. And that and at the time I hated it, but.
But it was
to this
character
day,
building, and it was right. It instilled into you certain values, and absolutely.
I like to think that, and without that, I think we do younger generations. We do them a disservice because they don't know what they don't know.
Well, and I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to actually teach at the Art Institute, and I had, I walked in thinking I'm going to have millennials in my class. No. I had Gen Zers in my class.
No
Well,
kidding.
talk about feeling really old, right? And the interesting thing was I had that mindset of the fact that they're young, the young whippersnappers, like every generation is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Aspirational.
but it was interesting because I had this, when I was running a design department back in 2000. I had people that were millennials, and I had everything from people that were really hungry and still kind of were dealing with it the way I was dealing with it when I came up, and people that were basically shopping for Prada on YouTube or what God knows where, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I walked in as a professor, positive but still kind of weary. And I realized, and I had students from all over. I had people from Japan. I had people from, the associate that basically is working with me is from Brazil. I could not really package everybody in one neat box. Even though it was this Gen Zers, right? There were people that were, to your point, hungry. There were people that were going to earn their right to be at the table, that were going to basically not be told every single thing they needed to do. They were going to show initiative. All that stuff that I was familiar with because of what I had the experience of doing, right? And I couldn't really label everybody the same way. So it's fascinating because I think it really comes down to your point. It really comes down to that background. It comes down to that sense of, being involved, feeling passionate enough to care and basically be vested, or basically just write it out and just not really be engaged at all.
Well,
But I don't think that's even age related, to be honest, Lynn. I think that's
personal responsibility is universal.
Yeah, absolutely.
It didn't kill our grandparents or great grandparents, or actually, when you think about all of the luxuries that we have at our disposal, we should be so lucky, and it's kind of on the backs of people who.
It's true. Yeah. Well, we stand on the shoulders of giants, honestly.
Our predecessors, and that's there's a great. The quote that it's the man in the arena that counts. That it's not the critic.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah, it's the man in the arena, not the critic, that counts. Because it's easy to be a critic, but it's really. And circling back around to elected officials, it is getting harder and harder and harder to represent. Constituencies, no matter where they are, where they fall politically or socioeconomically, and that to make it so hard on people that are willing to give up their personal lives. And I can speak from absolute personal experience. My ex-husband was an elected official for almost 12 years. He was mayor 3 times. Our entire life revolved around community service, literally. And it's not for the faint of heart, but I'm still very proud of serving my community in that way, because it's about that moral fabric and the fiber that makes a community worth and living in and enriches our lives and allows others from wherever they come to have their lives enriched.
Well, you're taking the role of public service seriously. I mean, really.
Well, I think too, we didn't have ulterior motives. He didn't want to run for a higher office. He wasn't looking to change
a launching pad for something else.
No. And I think that there's a big difference
Absolutely.
between the people, and you can see it even in every community. The people who want to go on to higher office,
Right.
and the people who just simply want to serve their community.
Right, you're there to do the job that you basically said.
Fill the potholes, make sure there's trash is getting picked up.
I don't get a chance to ask this a lot, but what was the hardest part of that?
At
and what was the
first,
most rewarding part?
It's a good question. I think at first it was hard for me to hear people be critical of his decision making, because you cannot please all the people all the
Right.
time. There's always going to be
Somebody who's
you
in
have
favor.
to make a decision, and so it was hard for me to hear criticism at first, but and there were days when I would come home from work and I'd have to run upstairs and throw on a ball gown and get myself all made up and go out and walk into a room full of strangers and have
Fulfill that role.
another 5 hours of conversations and everything. The most rewarding aspect of it, well, first and foremost, is all of the wonderful people that I met and now call friends and colleagues, and it just an access to experiences that you wouldn't have unless you were in that position.
Right.
Whether it's sitting on, Invictus, the yacht that is brought in by Mr. Caruso into the harbor. We had the opportunity to go aboard and have evening with him. That was really, really special. But I think probably it's more the human experience. So we would occasionally go and present a proclamation at the request of a family at a senior center for like a grandma that was turning 105. And to walk in and to make that presentation one-on-one and to greet the family, and the family would be so excited that the mayor is here and he's got this proclamation and honoring, and he's going to honor you with his
And
position.
see how much that meant.
Oh my gosh, it was very, very, very rewarding. Also, and also there were some big capital projects, City Hall.
Sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, City Hall, Marina Park. I mean, there were some very significant capital improvements made in Newport Beach during that time that he was headed up. For better or worse, some people were very, very against where City Hall is now. I'm very proud of it. I was a city arts commissioner and the chair of the Arts Commission, so that project enabled us to have a Civic Center Park where we have a rotating sculpture garden. And that, to me, injecting the arts into communities has always been something I've been interested in, whether it's through the symphony or, through...
Well, it has a proven positive value.
Absolutely.
For everyone in the
You
community.
bet. I mean, I even sit in my doctor's office, which happens to be across the street from the park, and I'll be sitting there waiting for him, and I'm looking at these sculptures going, wow, okay, I don't get it, but it's kind of cool, and they rotate. So next year when I'm sitting in his office, I'll look out there and it'll be something different.
So let me ask you relevant to the show, because I think we're going to wrap up here in a
Sure.
quick, but let me ask you relevant to the show that you're doing. Okay.
Yes, Stu News Sunday.
Yes, Stu News Sunday.
On KOCI.
Yeah. What is the most rewarding thing for you to do that show? Because I know you did one before, and then you kind of went on a little bit of a hiatus, and now you're back to doing it.
Yeah, so before it was Sunday Brunch with Tom and Lynn,
Yeah.
and now it's Stu News Sunday, because since the time between our taking a hiatus, kind of 16 to 18, Tom took the helm at Stu News Newport, and that's a hyper community, like micro community news and Tom was the publisher at the LA Times Daily Pilot, so he is a community news man. I mean, it runs in his blood. And he knows a lot of people in Costa Mesa and Newport Beach. So,
So this is a digital platform for that, kind of an extension arm for that?
Yeah, and that's why we named it Stu News.
Yeah.
We renamed it Stu News Sunday, but it's still the format is still the people, places, and things that make Newport and Costa Mesa and Newport Mesa, the communities that they are, and they are very just in many ways, because we border each other, and we have
Yeah.
a lot of, the Newport, we have Mesa Water, we have Newport Mesa Unified School District.
Right.
There's a lot of crossover in our communities. However, politically, let's say, our councils are made up of very different personalities and political sides, and so. But to answer your question about what's the most rewarding, perfect example, and we were talking about this off IR, is we had Jerry Rosen, the founder and president of Working Wardrobes.
She's a friend of the show too.
Yes.
We've had her on before. Yeah.
Yes, and she's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Jerry is great.
And so we were talking about their recent tragedy of their facility burning down in Irvine, and how are things going to look moving forward, and how can we help as a community, help you, who an organization that has helped so many
in a very meaningful way.
In incredible, and especially like with our vets, we have a strategic alliance through their VetNet program with another organization I'm involved in, the Newport Beach 1st Battalion 1st Marine Foundation, and we work with VetNet to get, when these men and women come back from deployment, they have challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're still understanding the effects of PTSD and concussion and all of the physical and mental things that they're exposed to, because our enemies are all getting smarter too, right? So they're using different tactics. And so as those are deployed abroad, we have to deal with them when they come home.
These are young men and women that are basically going to have this challenge for a long part of their life. It's not like, that's the other thing that sometimes
they're young. They're so young.
That's what gets missed sometimes, I think, whether they've been injured or disabled or whatever. Like, this is not.
How are they going to move forward?
This is not an old person. This is a young person that's got 60, 70 years ahead of them.
Correct.
With these challenges.
So to answer your question, I think that to use this platform that we have the gift of in helping other people and helping our community and helping, I enjoy it, and I enjoy helping people, and it is a platform by which I can use my political and
connections,
and my skin, the skin in the game that I've had in the community for many, many years, even before I met my husband. I was very involved in certain organizations, is to give back and pay it forward. I don't know, to a certain extent.
The old pay it forward, yeah.
Well, there's a reason why that saying exists, because what blessings I have today, I don't take for granted that I may not have tomorrow.
Well, and you're involved in
anybody. We're all vulnerable.
You're involved in a lot of stuff. You it's not just vets, right? We'd be remiss if we don't talk about the Newport Beach shelter.
Right, so the animal shelter. Yes. So Newport Beach has an animal. It's a fairly new animal shelter to the city, because we had the facility in Huntington Beach is very close, and Costa Mesa has one, and the county obviously has one. But I was asked to get involved with the Friends of the Newport Beach Animal Shelter, and the leadership of that board consists of several former mayors, Evelyn Hart, Nancy Gardner, Kathy Thompson, who's a philanthropist locally, Gene Watt, who heads up a couple of different organizations around town, and their daughters, and other people in providing a forever home for our lost and abandoned animals, of which I have adopted two. And we are going to be buying a facility, but the facility is run by our police department. And as long as we can...
That's interesting.
Yes. So as long as the city council has said that they will support a public-private alliance, in that if Friends of the Newport Beach Animal Shelter can raise the funds to continue to provide this service...
Which is really the future. That kind of collaboration is really the future, right? Yeah.
Big time. And it spans, we were looking at it with regard to the arts, and actually the arts has always to some degree been a public-private alliance. Just look at Segerstrom Center for the Arts and how that's come about. And so Friends of the Newport Beach Animal Shelter, right now we're running a founding member campaign, and your lovely significant other, Rachel Svoboda at Study Brunch Agency, is helping us with our messaging and with this campaign. And we're raising money for a capital campaign to purchase a facility in Newport Beach, and then an ongoing endowment to continue the operations for as long as we possibly, forever, hopefully.
Well,
so it's a forever home.
And the thing that's interesting about that, we've talked about a lot of stuff, but the thing that's interesting about that is, here's a nonprofit, and I'm bringing it back to the sort of that digital arena.
Yes.
Here's a nonprofit versus a for-profit.
Right.
But it's in today's marketplace, or in anything that you do, messaging and putting out that message and controlling your own messaging and doing it with a strategic purpose, is super critical.
Yeah.
And so again, even in the case of the animal shelter, this is something that you guys are involved in, and so it makes sense that the board is constituted the way it is. It's people that are involved in the community, but people that also bring skill sets to this.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the way I look at it, just kind of reining this all these ideas back in, is every community has its personality and its footprint in the world. In the state, you can look at it from the world, from the country, from the state. But our community, like Newport Beach, it's a very distinct community that many of us who are involved on the level we are love very much. And that when you talk about the fabric of a community, and I think Gene Watt put it the best, where we show our value system, we show what we value in the things that we do in our community, and helping, and whether that's housing, whether it's providing an animal with a forever loving home, whether it's getting people involved, maybe in politics or maybe as a commissioner or there are many, many ways in which people non-politically can be very influential in their communities. We have a marina committee, a harbor commission, who their sole responsibility is the way in which our harbor and beaches are maintained, who has access, what kind of businesses. I mean, there's so much work to be done to keep the fabric of a community vibrant for its businesses, for its citizens, for its visitors.
Yeah, it doesn't just happen. You have to be really engaged, and if
do.
you're not, then somebody else is. If you're getting the benefit, or they maybe do something that you may not like, but they're engaged and involved, and you're not.
And I want to leave my community a better place.
Right.
We're not going to live forever. Some people think they're immortal, but the reality is, and if the Kobe Bryant tragedy that has hit our community
just like that
on a variety of levels, all of those families, and this worldwide icon. Talk about a brand, and just boom.
But it was not just Kobe and his daughter. There were other people on that plane that were also very involved and engaged in the community that were also lost.
Huge. And so imagine now the lives that will not be touched by those people.
Right, and Lynn, it's funny because we start when we were talking about this show, and we were talking about how to basically focus on. We talked about sort of that digital arena and maybe focusing on that. But you really brought it back to one thing that we always talk about here too, is the issue of volunteering and putting yourself out there. And I will say it again because we're entering into that crazy season again, right? Is that I don't care what you feel about a particular candidate or another, right? First and foremost, stop for a minute and realize that those people that are running for office, regardless whether you agree with them or not, are putting themselves literally in the gauntlet.
Yes.
And not only them, but their families as well.
You bet.
Case in point, right? And that at the very least, they deserve the respect to actually put themselves that way. Now, they may have an ulterior motive of why they're doing it or not, but boy, I mean... Well,
that's why you cast your vote, because, if you feel strongly about something, you can influence others.
That's how you filter.
And that's how you filter out the bad,
right, exactly.
Apples. Hopefully, but enough people have to get involved.
Well, and if to your point again, the volunteering doesn't have to be necessarily at a city council level or an elected official position. You can volunteer at a shelter. You can volunteer, in coastal whatever. Find something that you're passionate about and basically apply yourself to that.
That's right.
And you've already kind of answered the question, but from my personal experience with volunteering, the reward that you get out of that, in touching or causing whatever little thing better than you found it, right? It is immeasurable. I don't think nobody could give you any amount of money that would give you the same sense of reward that you would get from volunteering into something that is meaningful.
Well, and the reality is we may and or probably will never know the impact
and the ripple effect of what we've done.
That we do now might impact somebody 5, 10, or 20 years from now. We don't know that, but that's okay because...
Well, but that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because there's a part of you that is also... And I tell people, there's a part of volunteering that's a little selfish. Because once you get that feedback from volunteering and doing something positive, it's really addictive.
Well, every single person that is listening to this or who I've spoken to or
Yeah.
that you've spoken to, if you ask them, can you recall a person or a place or a moment in your life that really maybe set you on a different path or
Right.
exposed you to something that really did change your
Right,
life?
yeah.
Every single person I've ever asked that question of, they barely hesitate to be, and they are able to answer that question because everybody has that.
Mm-hmm.
And that person may or may not know. I went back and told one of my high school teachers after I graduated from high school, a few years after that, I went back and said, you specifically did this.
And it caused this.
Correct.
Yeah, it was.
She would have never have known.
No, it's true. And
She would never have known.
and if you stop for a minute and look at your life, there are moments like that were very shaping
Mm-hmm.
in the path that you took or the fork in the road in which direction you went, and things that you maybe didn't even realize were instilled in you until years later.
Well, maybe somebody listening today will go,
Yeah.
I've always wanted to volunteer. Maybe I'll go online and see what commissions have positions, or I'll call the animal shelter and see if they need dog walkers, or I'll go and, I don't know, visit, some people in a senior center. There's from the slightest little act of kindness to great leadership. There's a place for
We're
everybody.
gonna wrap up. I'll share this with you, Lynn. It's and I've shared this with Paul. For years and years and years, and I think it's very common. We say, leaving it better than you found it. I came across a gentleman that basically is in his 30s. That basically there was a lady in her 80s that was living on the same floor. It's in L.A. He's an actor, and she was alone. She was isolated. He basically recommended, and they became roommates.
Oh, how sweet!
Right? And I mean it's
That's
really
interesting
amazing. It's really
juxtaposition.
amazing, right? And so I went, and of course I heard the story, and I went on. What do? I go to Instagram to find this person, right? So I'm looking, and under his photo and under his name and everything, the wording was very slightly changed, and what it said was, "Leave one person better than you found them."
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I shared this with Paul. I said, what's very interesting about that, just slight change of language, is it takes it from an impersonal to absolutely first-person personal.
Right. Don't get overwhelmed with trying to change the world.
Right. You
'cause
don't. You can.
Never
just
going to
be
happen. Never
very,
has
The
happened.
person down the corridor, and basically just having a roommate situation. And it was very cute because he was talking about when she's passed away. She was talking about how they would sit down and watch movies, and drink champagne, and eat popcorn.
How cute.
So
Right.
again,
Simple.
it's a very
things.
simple thing, but how rewarding that is, and how meaningful.
The time. It's just the time.
The time.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, thanks for taking the time.
It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed being here.
Likewise. And so, Paul, thanks for indulging us and letting us run a little bit longer, and for just listening today. Usually Paul jumps in, but I think we fascinated him enough.
I think this was a fascinating conversation. That was one of the few I thought I better just let them go. They're on a riff here. I'm gonna let it happen and let it roll out.
We appreciate that.
Okay,
We
so-
appreciate you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for being here, and we'll be back again next Wednesday with. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's going to be kind of an interesting little thing too. So join us again on the Raad Life 12 to 1 every Wednesday. And Lynn, I'm sure we'll have you back.
Thank you. I'd
Yeah.
love to come back.
All right.
You have been listening to the Raad Life Radio Show with your host and age explorer, Rad Gantos, brought to you on the one and only octalkradio.net. Join us again next week as we continue our journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older.